This just blows my mind, okay? And in 1887, these two brilliant scientists, and they were pretty much pushed out of our knowledge pool, out of our psyche. Michelson Morley performed what became a very important experiment, because until then, all scientists throughout the ages were obsessed with the ether. It was called the ether. The ether, the breath of creation, what holds everything together, what holds creation together, what holds the planets in place, and so forth. And it was called the ether. And they were obsessed with the ether, and they couldn't quite understand what the ether was. They had all kinds of definitions for it. If only they understood that it was vibration and resonance. That's really what they were describing, was the ether, is vibration and resonance. The breath of the Creator that holds everything in perfect harmony and coherent, resonant harmony. So Michelson-Morley experiment was performed to prove the existence of the ether. And they wanted to prove that the earth moves through the ether. Well, they did two very important things. First of all, they couldn't find the ether. They couldn't prove that the ether existed. And they did this with sending out light beams in perpendicular directions, and they were measuring the movement of the light bouncing back, and they found there was no movement. I'm giving it to you a very, very basic English, so it's easy to understand. You can go and research this yourself. And what came back is that there was no movement, there was no deflection, nothing. So the conclusion was that the earth is not moving through space. Therefore, the ether does not exist. So I'm not worried about the ether too much, because by now we understand that it's resonance and sound. But the most important thing that they showed is that the earth does not move through space. And as we sit here in this room right now today, there is no scientific evidence whatsoever that has been proven beyond any shadow of doubt, other than the evidence that we've been shown by NASA or the other space agencies. By now we know who they are and who controls them. There is no scientific evidence that the earth actually moves through space. I told you I'm going to push you beyond some of our capacity, break down the walls of our own resistance. This has really shocked me, and I no longer believe anything. Even Michio Kaku says, Michio Kaku, says that there is no scientific evidence presented today that tells us unequivocally that the earth moves through space. What the hell is this all about? What it does tell us that ether has been replaced by the particle physics universe. And we can start seeing the agenda that was put in place a few hundred years ago, starting with the concept of gravity that replaces magnetism. Then we start seeing the discovery of the electron in 1897, where J.J. Thomson discovers the theoretical particle, the electron. Never proven to exist, but the theoretical particle suddenly becomes a reality. And a few years later, let me remind you, do you see anything physical in the picture of the electron? No. And this is why people like Nikola Tesla and Edlitz Kalnin's comments, and even Albert Einstein and many others about the electron and that whole agenda of replacing the ether of creation with particle physics. Particle physics very quickly replaces the ether, because that's something they didn't want to get us sucked into. And suddenly Rutherford comes with his atomic model in 1909, 1911, and we are still stuck with the same bloody bullshit atomic model that was presented by Rutherford. And that, quite frankly, if you go and look at that experiment, that atomic model experiment, I'm sorry, I read it, I've looked at that over and over again. It is so naive, it is so stupid. And it can be so quickly and easily explained with magnetic fields. Everything that Rutherford experienced and reported on with his experiment could be very simply explained with magnetic fields and toroidal fields. And then by the time Einstein released his theory of relativity, that was the final death knell in the ether, or the theory of the ether, or as we call resonance and frequency. What's even more interesting and important is that the many experiments that have been done with the cosmic background radiation over the years have brought back some very, very interesting results. And Max Tegmark from MIT, in The Principle, I don't know if you've seen the documentary called The Principle, very clearly tells us, and he's the guy that drove that experiment, they found that from our perspective, the earth is the center of all of creation. This is not popular in mainstream science, and yet this is what the most mainstream science results are telling us, that from our perspective, the earth is the center of the universe. Not only that all the other observable galaxies and solar systems seem to exist in layers moving away from Earth as the center of the universe. Do with this information what you want. What I'm going to bring you back to is that everything is connected through a fractal nature of resonance that creates magnetic fields and toroidal fractals throughout all of creation. The atomic models, the quantum theory, all of that stuff can be very easily explained with the stuff that I shared with you, with sound, resonance, and magneticism. What happens is that the more questions we ask about this, the more mysterious are the things we find. And this is why I call this presentation Exploring the Nature of Our Reality, and really pushing the boundaries of our own capacity to tolerate new information. Because this certainly has shaken my reality, and I no longer believe anything I'm told by any university professor anywhere, because they're all lying. And yet, Max Tegmark gave us some very interesting information. What we do with it is what matters most. What do we do with all this knowledge? Because we can't affect what happened in the past, but we certainly can affect tomorrow morning when we wake up and we enter the world and we share our knowledge and information with others. And this is why I believe that we're the ones we've been waiting for, and we are co-creating a new reality. Now that you know how powerful your thoughts are, how powerful every word you write, how powerful every message you leave for somebody on your cell phone, how every email you send, how powerful all your communication and all your thoughts are, you realize how quickly we can co-create a new reality for ourselves. Because all of this positive stuff, the positive thinking, the positive talking, the positive co-creation of a new reality for humanity that is filled with prosperity and abundance is right here. We are creating it as we speak it and as we think it. No one can stop that. It's up to us. And the more people say it, think it, speak it, imagine it, the quicker we are going to create it. And we are more enslaved now than we've ever been before. But with this enslavement comes the absolute understanding of how important it is to liberate ourselves from this enslavement. And it'll require a whole new kind of thinking, because we cannot solve the problems that were created for us with the same kind of thinking that created the problems. So our system is broken, it cannot be fixed. We need a whole new kind of system to get out of this mess. We've been born into the slavery, we now understand it, we've grappled with it, it's okay. The fact that we get it, we understand it, we can now do something about it. And remember that it is the money system that has controlled us, that has enslaved us. Money is the tool by which we are enslaved. Until we come to terms with what money is, where it comes from, how it was created, we will remain subject of those who control and create the supply of money. And if you don't know this yet, the Sumerian king's tablets tell us very clearly that money was created as a tool of enslavement at a very specific point in time in history. It's when these first priest kings were descended from heaven to earth, and these first priest kings created the form of writing. They wrote their clay tablets, and they issued their clay tablets from their temples as the first bankers, as the first forms of money. These are the first forms of money we find on earth. Whether it's 6,000 or 8,000 years ago, who knows? But what it tells us is that the first kings owned all the land, they were the first bankers, and their temples were their first banks. And the way they created money is exactly the same way that our bankers create money today.